Hey there, how's it going? So lately I've been thinking a little bit about the topic of anxiety in Star Trek and how it kind of has a way of showing up in interesting ways here and there throughout the series with characters like Barclay, Garak, Hoshi, Ensign Gilmore from the Equinox, and all these various different kinds of anxiety they represent. So it could be transporter phobia with a little bit of hypochondria like Barclay, could be severe debilitating claustrophobia for Garak, or Hoshi's away mission anxiety that almost made her go back to Earth, or Ensign Gilmore's PTSD caused by being chronically ambushed by aliens that randomly fly out of portals at you out of nowhere. And I was thinking about it's like my transmission is being overridden by a VHS signal coming from outer space. Okay, computer. Computer, resume dictation. So, Mom, like I said, I know you've been worried about me a lot. I've got an appointment with Counselor Troi, so don't worry about me at all. I'll see you next time we're at Starbase. Computer, end dictation. Computer, rewrite the whole letter. Make me sound really happy. Make it sound like I got a lot of friends. Computer, when was my appointment anyway?
Well, Ensign, I'm so glad you could make it. Now, why don't you tell me what's on your mind?
Okay. Uh, now, my actual appointment is with Counselor Troi, right?
I am Counselor Troi. Oh, you must mean Deanna. I'm her cousin, Rodolphus Troi. Runs in the family, you know. In fact, she's the one who got me my job here a couple months ago. Got me an interview with Captain Picard, and the rest was history.
Oh, I see. So you're new here on the Enterprise?
Oh, couple of months. But I'm feeling right at home now. Love watching those stars go by outside my window. Love chatting with Guinan over in 10 Forward. She does not like me. Can't imagine why. I think I like it that she doesn't like me. I just love that look on her face. Yeah. Anyway, so glad you're here. You've come to the right place.
Mm-hmm. It's not exactly what I was expecting, but it'll be okay.
You're thinking you'd rather see Deanna, and you're not sure if this is gonna work out for you.
Well, not exactly.
Yes.
What? No, that's not what I meant to say. It's just that.
Yes, it was.
What? No.
Liar.
What?
Liar! I'm a Betazoid, Ensign. Not a lot gets past me. Not one devious little deception from that little mask between your ears. That's why I've got this job. And I'm better at it than Deanna, 'cause she's only half Betazoid. You won't get better help anywhere in the galaxy than right here.
I see. Uh, well, uh, well, I'm not really sure what to say right now.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Now, why don't we just start at the beginning? What's bringing you in?
Okay. Well, you see, it's just that I've got a little bit of a history with certain kinds of anxiety, like phobias, things like that. And, well, lately I've been getting a little worried that I might be called to a certain kind of away mission, and I might have to,
Have to what?
well, it's just that we're on course for Alpha Beta Scariest 12. And you know what's on Alpha Beta Scariest 12?
What?
My worst phobia. I don't know what I'm gonna do. You gotta help me, Counselor Rodolphus. You gotta help me.
Uh-huh.
Here's the thing, Counselor. I know it won't be till a month or two when the Enterprise arrives at Alpha Beta Scariest 12, but I estimate there to be a substantial risk that Commander Riker picks me to be one of the poor quivering yellow shirts who has to go down to the planet and face my phobia. I need your help. What am I gonna do?
Yes, Ensign. I think I see the problem here. Starfleet can't have crew members quivering on the transporter pad like choking tribbles. I'm glad you came to see me. So, Ensign, how about this? Let's say that at this very moment, we were in orbit and we got a message that you were needed for the away mission. What do you think would happen next?
Well, that's just it. I'm kind of afraid that I might just up and pull a reg.
What do you mean, pull a reg?
Oh, Reg Barclay. Remember a couple months back when Lieutenant Barclay couldn't get on the transporter pad to go over to the Yosemite? You know how many different people I heard that same story from?
That's got to be the classic TNG episode about anxiety and phobias. Next Generation Season 6, Episode 2, Realm of Fear, in which Lieutenant Barclay experiences transporter phobia and even a little bit of hypochondria, where for a little bit of time he convinces himself he has this rare condition called transporter psychosis because his arm is glowing, seeing these strange shapes during transport and all this kind of stuff.
He just refused to get into the transporter. What if that happens to me? What if I'm told to do something down on the planet and I just can't do it?
I see.
Mr. O'Brien says, transporter chief, we bump into each other once in a while in 10 forward, but Mr. O'Brien says he used to have a phobia of arachnids.
Arachnids? What are these arachnids?
Arachnids. Those terrestrial invertebrate arthropods with the dual segmented bodies consisting of two sets of four legs for a total of 8 creepy crawly legs that give you the creeps.
Oh, arachnids, of course. I always just call them spiders.
Oh, that is what the kids are calling them these days, isn't it?
Yes, Ensign, and times are changing. Change your vocabulary or get left in the dust. The up-and-coming generation of Starfleet is not going to be using big words like arachnid anymore. Simplify or die.
But you know what he said about his fear of spiders? He said he got over his fear after this one time when he had to go over to a starbase to fix their emitter array, and the whole system was infested with these giant Talarian hook spiders with legs 1/2 meter long.
I see.
He said that was when he got over his fears. Because if he hadn't fixed the emitter array, the whole system was going to blow up. So
I see.
he had no choice but to face his fears.
I see.
Face his fears and crawl into those horrible infested Jeffries tubes. And he said after that, his fear of spiders just wasn't the same anymore.
I see.
Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I just need a shock that can shock me out of my patheticness. Did you know he's even got his own pet spider now?
Does he?
He named it Christina, and it's a hairy tarantula. He didn't name it Skin of Evil or Wicked Webs or Doomed Death. He named it Christina, because he's not pathetic like me.
I see. Well, I think I'm beginning to get the picture of what you need for your treatment.
You are? Good. What do I need to do?
Well, you see, I've got a pet as well, and I think the two of you might like to meet. It's not a spider like Christina. It's better. So? Oh, don't worry, we can do it today. The cargo bay's right down the hall. I used to keep him in my quarters, but that was months ago, and he's still growing, especially after I started feeding him cows.
Well,
Don't worry, he's a small one. If he wasn't small, he wouldn't fit in the cargo bay. This is exactly what you need for your treatment. Nothing else will do it.
Well, I don't know. Are you sure?
Nothing else will do it. So, here's how we're gonna do it. I take you down to the cargo bay. We open up the door and I shove you in, and we lock the door and I wait outside. You're gonna feel so much better.
Warning, critical therapy distortion detected.
Satka, I told you to deactivate yourself.
Unable to comply. The Self-Automated Therapist Quality Assurance Program, or SATCA, cannot be deactivated without the termination of your Starfleet Temporary Counseling License.
Oh, that's what it was. Dang Starfleet. Okay, Satka. So if I'm not allowed to scare him straight, what am I supposed to do?
Well, maybe I could just set up an appointment another day with Deanna. Reg said she helped him a lot.
Did he?
Well, yeah. He told me all about their therapy sessions, and he never mentioned getting shoved into the jaws of a giant monster in the cargo bay. He even gave me a recording of some of their sessions.
Oh, did he? How in blazes did he get his hands on that?
Well, he is Mr. Barclay.
Well, I'll have to be reporting that. Anyway, so what did she tell him as his counselor?
Well, the part I remember, he was in her office, and he was finally, with great difficulty, letting her know how completely overwhelmed with terror he was of transporters. And the first thing she said back to him was what a completely reasonable thing it is to be afraid of being taken apart molecule by molecule. But then he just wilted in despair at that, which she noticed. So she told him, look, I wrote it down. So she told him, "You're not the first person to have anxiety about transporting. We can desensitize you to this type of fear. It's a slow and gradual process, but it works."
Aha! Take that, Satka. Desensitize. That's a great word. I love it. That's where my pet comes in, Satka.
Well, what happened next? Mr. Barclay wasn't sure how he felt about that, so he asked her how it worked. And the first thing she said to him was, "Well, you might first try a relaxation technique like plexing."
Warning, computational error, therapist distortion detected. The Starfleet Counseling Board does not recognize any empirically validated technique known as plexing. SATCA recommends the use of Federation-approved, empirically validated techniques.
Take that, Deanna. If they subjected you to this humiliating Satka charade, you would be out of a job. Plexing.
I don't know what's the deal with plexing, which is one of those weird little bits of that Next Generation episode Realm of Fear. It's one of those funny little bits that tends to stick in your memory. Counselor Troi tells Reg to do it. She says it's a betazoid technique, but she does prescribe it for Barclay, who is quite a human. But so far as I can tell, it looks like the show writers just kind of made it up out of thin air. But what makes that kind of odd is that she introduces it under the category of relaxation techniques for anxiety, which is definitely a real and very important category. And Troi does have Reg do deep breathing in other episodes, which makes a little more sense than or which side is it? I don't know which side it is.
Plexing. Okay, Satka, tell me this. What's the difference between desensitizing and me showing this pathetic little ensign here my pet?
Systematic desensitization for a specific phobia involves constructing an anxiety hierarchy of anxiety-inducing stimuli on a graded scale, ranging from the least anxiety-inducing to the most anxiety-inducing. Systematic desensitization involves training the subject in relaxation techniques and then exposing the subject to the least anxiety-inducing item on the list, and repeating this process until it becomes comfortable, before moving on to the next item on the anxiety hierarchy. Failure to make proper use of the anxiety hierarchy, or any spontaneously shoving the subject into the tender care of a vicious, slobbering monster down in the cargo bay, may result in re-traumatization of the subject and significant worsening of psychological neuroses.
Satka, just shut up. Why don't you just shut up? Don't care what you think. Just shut up.
Oh, I think I'm beginning to get it. So I need to start with something small. And if I start with something too big, I could just make it worse. That must be what Deanna meant by saying it was a slow process. So I can make an anxiety hierarchy and start with something so small that it doesn't freak me out, but still makes me uncomfortable. And maybe if I take that thing and I just do it instead of avoiding it, and maybe while I'm doing it, I could use some kind of relaxation thing like deep breathing or something, not plexing, I suppose. But then maybe I'll gradually become more comfortable with it if I keep on repeating it day by day until maybe I'll be comfortable enough to go on to the next thing on my anxiety hierarchy.
Yeah, whatever. Come on, wouldn't you rather come visit the cargo bay with me?
I guess that must be what happened to Mr. Barclay. Pretty sure he did say they were working on something kind of like that for the last couple months ever since the incident. I think he said that after they rescued those survivors from the Yosemite, that's when he started working with Deanna on systematic desensitization or something like that. And I think he said even before they started that systematic thing, I think he was already feeling better because part of the situation surrounding the Yosemite, he had to face his fear and get into that transporter a number of times while his fear kept increasing each time until he finally, one last time, he was forced to go into that transporter and he came out of it as a hero. He came out of it with a lost crew member, meaning that he solved the mystery of the creepy monster worms in the transporter beams, and he saved the crew members from the Yosemite. So he felt amazing. He felt relieved. He felt like he made the right choice, and everything went right as a result. So maybe the reason his phobia started to go into remission right then was because some part of his brain recognized that the result of going toward the fear that time was this really happy and safe and calm feeling, whereas if he had gone in and then it went badly, as his brain perceived it, or if he tried to go in, but then he had to back out last minute or just barely escape with his life as it seemed, it probably would have reinforced his automatic sense that he must avoid the transporter at all costs. And then I guess the phobia would have got worse. So that's why, even though Reg did do some counseling work afterward to deal with things properly, I think he had a huge head start because of how he faced his fears throughout that Yosemite situation. And the reason systematic desensitization is so important is because the non-systematic version, like Barclay just conjuring up his willpower and just stepping into the transporter, it could go well or it could go badly. Unfortunately for him, it went well. And just like with O'Brien facing all those giant hook spiders, the result served to give him a sense of mastery over his fear because it turned out well and his nervous system was flooded with all these good feelings after he, by action, demonstrated his control of the situation.
Yes, Ensign, you are quite correct. So, that means you can come with me to the cargo bay. I promise it will all turn out very good in the end.
Warning, critical
Oh,
therapy.
shut up, Satka!
Warning, critical therapy.
All right, I won't make him do it. Just shut up!
You know what? I think that was exactly what happened with Hoshi.
What happened with Yoshi? Who's Yoshi?
Hoshi Sato. She was one of the crew members back on the first Enterprise.
You mean Kirk's Enterprise?
No, not Kirk's Enterprise, the one before that.
But Kirk's Enterprise was the first Enterprise. That's what my Starfleet history professor told me back at the academy. That's what got me an A+ in my exam for the class. That's what all the study guides said. And that's what Cisco is gonna tell the time cops 4 years from now, after he has to time travel to the 23rd century to stop Arn Darvin's terrorist Tribble from blowing up a truckload of quadrotriticale and blowing up Captain Kirk's crew with it. After all that, Cisco is gonna say to the temporal investigation officers after he gets back, he tells them, this was the first Enterprise, Constitution class. So let me tell you, Ensign, my Starfleet history professor got it right.
Well, they were all wrong, because the one I'm talking about is the little-known Enterprise from 100 years prior to that, captained by this one really agreeable guy with a baseball cap named Jonathan Beckett Archer.
With a base what?
Oh, I don't know. I think it caps off base radiation or something. Base radiation, baseball cap. I don't know. That's a really good question. But anyway, so his communications officer, her name was Hoshi Sato. Reg told me to look her up. There's a whole set of holo programs in the historical database, and he said her story was a really big encouragement to him. I actually just went through it yesterday.
Ensign, you should know that holodeck programs recommended by Mr. Barclay are no substitute for seeing a good counselor.
I know, I should have come to you instead. But anyway, it's all starting to make sense to me. You see, she was a linguist. She came on board the ship because Captain Archer wanted her expertise. But a little bit into their mission, she started to wonder if she was really even cut out for deep space exploration. She says in her log that she reminded herself of her slug.
Her slug?
Her slug. She had a pet slug, and
This Hoshi was a non-humanoid gastropod with an oozing epidermis?
no, she wasn't a slug. She had a slug. It was her pet. She was human. Like I said, she was a linguist from Earth who used to teach in Brazil, and she took her pet slug with her on the mission, but it wasn't doing very well.
Oh, so she thought she must be a slug since she had a slug. What a psychotic. I hope they got her off the ship before she started.
No, she just reminded herself of her slug. Hey, is it okay if I just tell you the whole story, starting at the beginning and going all the way to the end?
Well, we've got the time. Besides, if you're talking, then Satka might leave me alone. All right, tell me the story about this Yoshi the slug woman.
Okay, so Hoshi Sato was an officer on the first Warp 5 ship, which they called Enterprise, and they had just set off on their second mission, and she noticed her slug wasn't doing well, so she took it in to see Dr. Phlox. They tried different ideas to help the slug adjust, and afterwards she just kind of looked at her slug and said in this worried voice, she wasn't meant to be in this environment. Well, a couple days prior to this, she had just gone over to see the captain to see if she could get different quarters because the stars were going the wrong way and she just couldn't take it as a highly sensitive person, or an HSP as it's called. The captain had been very understanding, very accommodating, but this time, as she was getting ready for another away mission, she found herself going in to see the captain again. This time to suggest to the captain that maybe she could help the away team better if she just stayed on the ship and helped them remotely instead of going with them. But Archer didn't think that was a better idea at all. And then he added, besides, you'll probably be glad to get out. But he could tell there was more that she wasn't saying. And finally, she just admitted she's a little claustrophobic in those environmental suits. And Archer kind of wondered why no one ever had reported any issues with her and her zero-G training or anything like that. And she just says, I just bit my lip and got through it. And then Archer says, well, you're going to have to bite your lip again. I need you over there. And he could still tell there was more that she wasn't saying, but when he asked her about that, she just kind of looked scared and then abruptly said, okay, I need to get down to the launch bay, and she headed out.
Why is this captain wasting all his time trying to figure out why his officer is uncomfortable? Who cares? What I always say is, if they're not brave enough to tell me about it, then I don't care enough to ask about it. Just bite your lip, you little wimp. That's my kind of captain. Take that, Hoshi sob story. Bite that lip and quit being a wimp.
Well, I was thinking with what Satka said a minute ago, maybe that's part of how people overcome anxiety and phobias and stuff, by doing it. As long as you can do it. Doing it rather than avoiding it. And I guess Archer knew that she could do it because she got through her zero-G training. She definitely could do it. But for the exposure therapy type of thing to work, she would have had to keep on doing it until it became more comfortable. And I guess if she just avoided environmental suits, or if she just only put them on if it was a life or death situation or something like that, then her anxiety about them would probably just keep on getting worse and worse over time, or best case scenario would stay the same.
But why didn't Archer tell her what a wimp she is? Little sluggo complaining about environmental suits, complaining about stars going in the wrong direction, complain. She just needs some forehead ridges and a bowl of gach. That would fix her.
Well, anyway, so she goes to the launch bay and tries to put on a good face, and she starts getting nervous when they arm her with a phase pistol, and she asks Archer, is this necessary? And anyway, they finally get over the ship, they're exploring it, and it's kind of dark and kind of spooky, and they find green stuff on the walls. The tricorder says it might be blood. And then once they're in the alien cargo bay, and she happens to be the first one to see all the dead bodies hanging upside down from the ceiling, hooked up to machines pumping triglobulin out of their bloodstream. And of course, she just can't take it. She screams and screams, and her breath gets kind of out of control, and she feels like she's got to get out of there as fast as possible. But of course, she can't because she's on a mission.
Sure, they didn't bump into a giant energy ribbon that transformed her into a sluggopod? I thought for sure this was going to be the part where she gets turned into a sluggopod.
Oh, come on. She never gets turned into a slug. I told you, she wasn't actually a slug. She had a slug. But
But actually though, that moment on the alien ship when they found the bodies, that was kind of an important moment where she began, especially the Moore, began to feel that she was kind of like her slug.
What?
Well, yeah, because she was so embarrassed by it afterwards. In sickbay afterwards, Phlox was telling her that she didn't need to be ashamed because dead bodies are shocking. But she said, I screamed like a 12-year-old. Nobody else screamed. And she started saying she shouldn't even be out here. Phlox asked her if she thought about going back to Earth and go back to teaching. But of course, she answered and she was able to explain there are reasons that Archer needs her. And plus, there are reasons that she wants to be here and reasons that she really can't go back. Meanwhile, that slug still wasn't adapting to its environment and couldn't absorb the nutrients. So, in her frustration, Hoshi suggested maybe they would have to look for a planet to drop it off on. And she looked over at the slug and said, she needs to get back to an environment that's more suited for her. And Phlox says, perhaps someplace she could teach.
So Hoshi Sato is a slug.
But isn't that kind of like what we've been talking about? All the different kinds of anxiety, they're kind of about adaptation. It's about being able to live well in a less than hospitable environment or in an environment that's not like the ones that you're used to. It's like being able to have a changing definition of what safety means or what normal means. Hoshi had to adapt to a lot, being in space, being on a ship, etc. But it seems like the biggest thing that she had to adapt to was facing her anxiety. And one small part of her anxiety was mild claustrophobia in the suits, but that wasn't the biggest part. It seems like the biggest part that needed adaptation, the one that she wasn't able to admit to Archer when he asked what was troubling her so much, and she just said, I got to get down to the launch bay, was maybe some kind of more general anxiety about the unknown or a strong discomfort with frightening or ambiguous situations or something like that.
Hoshi Sato is a slug.
Yeah, well, anyway, so she really started thinking more seriously about going back to Earth. Like she's thinking, I guess I am the kind of slug that can't make it here, and it's just going to wither and die if it can't adapt. She ends up telling Tucker that she's planning on asking the captain to take her home. She says she never should have left the university. She says she's not cut out for this. Her behavior on board the alien ship proves that. And she says the captain needs a translator he can count on, not somebody who can't take pressure like her.
Pathetic. She just needs some forehead ridges. And a bowl of gah. That always helps. She needs a big steaming bowl that's a wiggling up a storm, not some sluggo that's a quivering with fear.
Well, anyway, they find out that the dead aliens were having the triglobulin harvested out of their bloodstream by some bad aliens who came over and killed them and left these machines with the dead bodies. Archer wanted to stick around and try to help out the good aliens, who are the Axanar, so he wanted to stick around for that. But by the time they realize what's actually happening, the bad aliens show up and try to make a move on the Enterprise, and things start looking really bad. But then some of those good aliens show up. The Axanar, an Axanar ship pops over. Enterprise tries to tell the Axanar captain everything that's happened, but it's not working because the universal translator can't handle it. Hoshi is clearly getting flustered, her anxiety is starting to kick in, and she's frustrated and overwhelmed. And she tells Archer, this is just a really difficult language. Well, the bad aliens lock onto the Enterprise with a tractor beam for who knows what malicious intent. And the Axanar, good alien, on the view screen says some angry words through the comlink. And Hoshi's like, seems he got the part about killing the cargo ship crew, but he believes we did it, sir. At least I think he does. And whatever they try to feed into that universal translator, the Axanar captain is just nowhere close to buying it or even really understanding it. Archer tells Hoshi, tell the guy to scan the triglobulin pumps next to the dead body so he can tell that the Enterprise is a completely different technology. But the thing is, the universal translator can't do a bit of that. It can't get that message across because some of the key words can't be translated. And you can just see the pressure that Hoshi has already been feeling, but now is just kind of going through the roof. Her anxiety is hitting her like crazy. And she tells the captain, this is impossible, and she tells the captain and T'Pol, she's like, you don't understand. And she kind of falters as she says in a voice of shame, I'll just make things worse. And Archer says back to her, things can't get much worse. So then in a defeated little voice with all the air taken out of her, she just says, yes, sir. And it seems like at that point, the main voice in the room, for Hoshi at least, was the inner voice of her anxiety and her horrible negative past experience, her past experience with pressure, her past experience with anxiety in particular. Because she knew by experience that when she felt that kind of pressure, she would always just make things worse. She had come to know that when the stakes are that high, she's going to fail. She had come to know by experience that there's no hope for her. She had come to know that she's a failure, and it's so much better to just not try because she's going to fail anyway. But the problem is, in this particular situation, she doesn't have a lot of a choice. Normally, you have a choice, which I guess is part of what tends to perpetuate the anxiety cycle, or you could say the anxiety avoidance cycle. Having a choice allows you to choose avoidance, which makes the anxiety go away for a minute, go away temporarily, go away for now, but then it causes it to be even more powerful next time something comes up. Kind of like when Barclay walked away from the transporter pad, or like when Hoshi would avoid putting on an environmental suit or avoid going on ambiguous away missions. Maybe you could say that when Hoshi, or Barclay, when Hoshi faces a stressful, anxiety-inducing situation, there are only ever three kinds of resolutions as far as her brain is concerned. Either she faces the situation and that makes things better, and so her brain is saying, oh, next time, let's do that again. Or she faces the situation and that makes things worse, and so her brain says, oh, we'll never do that again. Or third option, she avoids the situation and doesn't face the anxiety, and so her brain says, phew, we got out of that one. We'll have to make sure we do that again from here on out. So we could say maybe up to this point in her life, she's primarily had negative or ambiguous experiences with her anxiety. She's generally felt hunted by her own fear. And if she does choose to face rather than avoid a fear, then it still feels like a failure because she feels she shouldn't have been so freaked out by it. And so in general, she has learned to avoid the anxiety, which I guess would be one of the biggest ways to perpetuate the anxiety cycle. If she keeps on avoiding, she'll never overcome those anxieties. And what happens in this situation is that she's forced to not avoid, but instead to face the fear because the bad aliens are starting to drill into the hole. And so Archer comes up to Hoshi and gently grabs her shoulders and looks into her eyes and says, Hoshi, we need you to do this. We all do. That's why you're here. And it seems like his comforting assurance and his presence and his confidence in her gives her own confidence and motivation enough to take the small step and try. And in that strength, she walks into the center of the bridge and takes the stage, as it were, and tries to summon all her courage and confidence and stammeringly starts to say something to the alien. And the exchange kind of goes back and forth and it keeps going back and forth. And then she starts to get more animated and excited. And before you know it, her visible nervousness has morphed into this kind of jittery enthusiasm. And then suddenly the alien breaks off the comm channel and his ship starts fighting the actual bad guys. And Hoshi saved the day. Well, the Axanar saved the day, but only thanks to Hoshi's stammering words and her terrified courage, which in turn were thanks to Archer's calm and reassuring presence. So anyway, Counselor Rodolphus, I guess the reason Reg wanted me to look that up is because he was hoping I would pick up the idea that sometimes that's part of how phobias work, I guess. Kind of like what Satka said. Maybe the ideal way to face any kind of fear, like public speaking, because Hoshi's big moment there, taking the stage, did definitely carry the connotation of public speaking. But the way to face most kinds of fear is maybe a little bit at a time, I guess. Especially if it's a proper phobia, like mine. But maybe one of the most important aspects is that your brain needs to know that the thing worked out. Not just some part of your intellect or your cognition, but experientially. Your unconscious self needs to feel deeply that this is something so good that the same thing needs to happen next time. So we could say that's kind of what happens when you give that speech or you audition that piece of music or you go into that social context or you take that test that you're terrified of failing or what have you. You do it, you step into it, and it turns out great instead of blowing up in your face. My favorite part in that sequence there on that Enterprise episode was right near the end of the episode, in the moments immediately after the situation has resolved. There's this moment when Hoshi's a bit blurry because the camera's not focused on her, but she's a bit blurry, but you can still see her, and she kind of looks like she feels like she's floating. And then Archer says, as the camera's bringing her into focus, and she has this gentle smile on her face, and Archer says, I think we may have just found a friend, talking about the Axanar. And he adds, thanks to you. And Hoshi's gentle smile kind of turns into this thoughtful, reflective, impacted look. And I love that sequence of those emotional expressions. So relatable, so meaningful, so rich. That floating feeling after the surreal crisis moment. And then the under-presenting politeness toward the captain as he talks to her. And then as he walks away, that stricken emotional contemplation on her face after he spoke the truth to her and he's walking away. The intense experiential impact that that event has on her psyche is just palpable. And then the episode concludes with...
Episode? What do you mean, episode?
Well, the episode concludes with Hoshi and Phlox dropping off Sluggo on the planet. And Hoshi says, it isn't exactly like the place you came from, but it's close enough. It's not that hard to adapt. You're going to do just fine here. And she and Phlox smile at each other and walk away, and the episode ends.
You know, Ensign, I can see why you found that holodeck program encouraging.
You've been a really big help to me, Counselor Rodolphus. I feel like everything is so clear to me now.
I'm glad I could be of help. Like I said, the best there is.
I'm still scared about what's going to happen next month when we get to Alpha Beta Scarius 12, but I think I know how I can prepare, and I feel like I know that just like Hoshi's slug, I can adapt bit by bit to the things that I'm experiencing, as long as it's not too radical of a thing all at once. You've been such a big help. I think the next thing I'm going to do, well, maybe I'll start journaling about my fears. And then I can write out an anxiety hierarchy and put an anxiety rating on each one and put them in order from least anxiety-inducing to most anxiety-inducing. And then I can start at the bottom of that list. I can start with an item that's just a little uncomfortable, but not enough to be terrifying. And I'll keep doing that one item until it's kind of boring. And then I'll move on to the next one. At least then, even if it does take a long time, at least I won't be like Garak.
Garak?
Oh, just somebody Captain Braxton told me about. You know Captain Braxton, the time traveler from the 29th century? He's always coming over and having a cup of tea, and we swap stories. Well, he told me about Garak. He's a Cardassian who lives over on Deep Space Nine, and he's got claustrophobia. Not like Hoshi. He's got real solid claustrophobia. And something like, 5 years from now or so, Captain Braxton said, Garak is going to end up in a Jem'Hadar internment camp.
Jem'Hadar?
Yeah, Jem'Hadar. They're bad. Big and bad. Kind of like soulless Klingons, but badder. Victory is life.
Remind me that I still need to buy some deep underground bunker on a distant moon along with a lifetime supply of freeze-dried meatloaf.
And so Garak ends up in that internment camp, and he can probably save the day if only he can just crawl into this tiny little space and rewire these gadgets that keep shooting sparks in his face whenever he tries. And he just about loses his mind trying to do so. Just like with Barclay's transporter phobia, and just like with O'Brien's arachnophobia, Garak's claustrophobia had just always been in the background in his life, not causing him trouble because he could just avoid contexts where it would have caused him trouble. Until he came to the situation where he didn't have a choice and he couldn't avoid anymore. And then suddenly he was forced to work on it. But the problem was, there wasn't the time or the space to actually deal with that properly, because he needs to be able to focus on the actual task. It's kind of like he lost his chance, and suddenly the time has run out to deal with your mental health issues. Now, it's like the time ran out, and now it's do or die. I don't want to end up like that, which is why I'm going to get started right now. I'm going to get started with journaling and then my anxiety hierarchy, and I'm going to be taking little steps one day at a time so that even if it's slow, I won't end up 5 years down the road like Garak, stuck in a life or death situation that feels impossible with my anxiety standing between me and getting away from the Jem'Hadar.
I keep telling you, you shouldn't be talking with that Captain Braxton fella. The stories he tells, I swear he's nothing more than a psychotic running around with a trans-dimensional teleporter on his wrist.
Well, Captain Braxton also told me about this ship called the Equinox that's going to end up way off in the Delta Quadrant, and it's going to bump into this one really cool ship called Voyager full of these amazing, really likable people.
And this one officer had such severe claustrophobia that she couldn't even ride the turbo lift. But the reason she had developed her claustrophobia was because she spent so much time trying to survive when these deadly aliens would all the time fly out of portals out of nowhere and ambush them, so close spaces weren't safe. So naturally, over time, you develop PTSD responses to that. So there was a very real reason for her claustrophobia. It emerged from a repeated trauma, and you could say that there was kind of a functional use for her phobia, a physiological process that her brain had developed to keep her safe. And I suppose the only way to untrain that physical response would be to gradually, over the long term, begin to have safe experiences in spaces that would otherwise have felt threatening, such as the turbolift. But to just suddenly be on board this safe starship and try to suddenly just get into the turbolift and go all the way up to whatever deck you're trying to get to, all of a sudden, that's just not going to work, because what it's going to do, and what it did for her, is it just sent her physiology into overdrive, and she ended up panicking, and she had to stop the turbolift and tumble out into the corridor, panting and trying to breathe. Chakotay, who was with her, didn't have the same kind of response, because even though he had had to fight the aliens a little bit, he hadn't had the same repeated traumatic exposure to it that she had. And for her, trying to ride the turbolift and pretend she was fine just resulted in her ending up just having to get out of the turbolift. And the end result, as far as her nervous system is concerned, is that it's going to feel like she just escaped with her life, and her phobia / PTSD is actually probably going to be a little bit worse next time.
The stories this Captain Braxton tells you, aliens coming out of portals?
And back to Garak, when Garak was in that tiny crawl space battling his claustrophobia, you know what Martok the Klingon says to Worf? Because they're all locked in that cell together. Well, Martok says, "That's real courage, facing your own fears. It's not the battle outside you that makes you the real warrior, it's the battle in the inside. It's the battle inside." Or something like that. And while I wasn't sure if that sounds exactly what I would expect a Klingon to say, and while I do have my doubts, if maybe Captain Braxton just made that part up, but if I can picture someone like Martok saying that about me and my fears, somehow it makes me feel like it's worth it. If someone with Martok's tough, gravelly Klingon voice, and with all
I've got a tough, gravelly voice.
Someone like Martok, with all the bloodthirsty monsters he probably skewered with the end of a toothpick in between yawning and getting a refill of blood wine. Well, if he says that facing your own fears and fighting the battle on the inside is what makes you a warrior, well, maybe it's worth it for me to get out and start trying to face my own fears, one little bit at a time, to start turning away from my anxiety and turning toward my fear, and becoming just a little bit stronger, one day at a time.
Oh, look at this. Looks like Commander Riker just sent a memo. Seems we came across a wormhole, and we'll be arriving at Alpha Beta Scarius 12 in about 6 minutes.